home fire safety and what you can do to make sure that you and your family are protected.
Welcome to the Southwest Utah Health Podcast. For the nearly 300,000 people living in the region, public health is the ounce of prevention that's worth a pound of cure.
Home fire safety and what you can do to make sure that you and your family are protected. But first of all, I wanted to ask Austin, give us a little bit of background. How long have you worked for the health department?
I started in February of 22, so a little over 3 years now.
And before that, what were you doing?
I was a soldier in the Utah Army National Guard. I was full-time there for a little over 10 years, 13 years overall as a combat medic. And before that, I was a wildland firefighter and currently a volunteer firefighter with Cedar Fire.
So it sounds like the fire was in your blood. You've never left firefighting. The interesting thing is a lot of what we do under emergency situations in the health department follow wildland fire structure as far as I think it's called the Incident Command System, ICS. And so when I first came to the health department, I was being trained in those type of things and learning new terms that you probably learned years ago as far as how to organize on scene of an emergency.
It's a standard, right? So everybody should understand it at least to the level that they're going to be expected to work in it. You know who you're working for, you know who you should be taking instructions from, because obviously some of those scenes develop really quickly.
It's a good way to keep people organized in an emergency situation where things can actually change rapidly. So you need to know who do I report to and what's my next assignment. Now, a little bit more about your title, Healthcare Coalition Coordinator. So that's one of the things we do in our Emergency Preparedness Division. What does that involve? It has to do with our hospitals and healthcare systems, right?
Yep, that's correct. So the Healthcare Coalition is a team of the hospitals, you know, the hospital emergency managers, healthcare providers, EMS, county emergency managers, you know, lots of organizations like that. And our focus with the Healthcare Coalition is to kind of prepare for and mitigate impact of a hospital surge event, because especially in our area, you know, St. George Regional Hospital can't, you know, go on divert and say, nope, we're full, we can't take anybody else. So how do we try and minimize that impact if they do have a surge event? You know, we do hazard vulnerability analysis every year, kind of identify our top 10 threats in the region, which, you know, wildfire makes the list every year.
Yeah, that's a great lead-in, in fact. So I've always heard that at least in the top 4 of those 10 have been natural disasters that public health might be involved in, like earthquake, a pandemic, of which we had COVID-19, of course, and then H1N1 in 2009 before that, speaking of those, definitely tested hospital capacity. Flooding, which is very interesting that flooding is one of our top disasters in a desert area. Then there is wildfire. And of course, that can become a personal neighborhood or home situation. But I've heard generally that even without wildfires, that a home fire is actually one of the most common, very close hitting personal disasters that a family might experience, right?
Yeah, it's I've been surprised at how many house fires we go on. You wouldn't think there'd be as many, but yeah, it just doesn't take much. You know, one faulty appliance or a cooking accident or something like that, and all of a sudden your kitchen's on fire.
What are some of the most common ways, especially preventable ways, that a fire can get started in a home?
Outside fires, really. You know, if you have a fire pit in your backyard, I've seen one of those where they had a fire, were roasting hot dogs or whatever the night before and thought they had it out, didn't quite have it out, and it got into some weeds and then creeped its way, you know, and at 4 o'clock in the morning it caught the shed, which caught the house. And
wow.
Kitchen fires are pretty common. You've got a grease fire and someone panics and throws water on it and splashes the fire all around, and that can get away from you. There's all kinds of things, you know, faulty electrical can cause it. If you have a DIY add-on, there's been some caused by that where the electrical wasn't done quite right and arced somewhere and caused a fire. It could be the Christmas lights or a candle. It's recommended to inspect your wires.
Going into prevention, and one of the rules in the campground, the fires have to be dead out if they're unattended. So that means cold, no chance, no sparks. How important is that? I mean, and that's not only with camping, but if you have a fire started right by your house and you're going in for the night, what do you do to make sure that no embers exist anymore?
I'd absolutely drown it with, you know, if it's your house, you should have a garden hose back there. So, I mean, use copious amounts of water, get a shovel and stir it around, and then, you know, to be extra sure, take the back of your hand and touch in there, and if it makes you jerk back, it's not out all the way yet.
And that's a common wildfire cause, is what people think their campfire's out or they'll leave it unattended. All it takes is a wind that blows a spark into the right fuel source, and you've got a problem there. Another thing you mentioned was kitchen fires. We all cook with things that could potentially cause a fire. I think especially grease, right? Flammable cooking products that come in contact with the flame. What are things we could do to either prevent or be able to quickly respond to a kitchen fire?
Yeah, big thing is, or an easy one is to have a lid handy, and know ahead of time that water isn't going to help the grease fire. It's just going to kind of spread it around, right? So if you smother it, have something to smother it. There's lots of YouTube videos you can watch of demonstrations of that. They'll spray it and it'll go everywhere, and then they'll do the exact same thing and drop a lid on it, and it's out.
Okay.
It's just
so
smothered.
We think, you just mentioned if we're putting out a fire outside, lots of water, but if it's a kitchen fire, you pour water on grease, that just spreads the fire out because the grease and water don't mix, right?
Yep.
So getting rid of the oxygen source of the fire, I love what you just said. I guess I hadn't remembered or thought of that. Simply putting a lid on the pan that has a fire in it will work. I've noticed marketed even there's sort of like a small blanket, a cover that you can have in your house that there's a fire. You throw this over the fire and it will actually smother a small fire because flames need oxygen to be able to burn, right?
Yep. Yeah, I've seen some videos of them. I haven't personally used those blankets, but I think the math checks out. If you smother it, remove the oxygen, the fire will go out.
Now, what about your average fire extinguisher? Will that put out a grease fire?
ABC, the normal general purpose extinguishers, you can try using it. It's not the recommended method. The best thing to do is to smother it. You can try like baking soda to help smother it, but if you're going to use an extinguisher, there is a K-type extinguisher that's rated for those kitchen grease fires. But one thing with those fire extinguishers is if you have one, make sure it's accessible. I actually had to check myself a couple weeks ago. I was like, we have a fire extinguisher, right? And of course we did, but it was all the way in the back of the cupboard underneath the sink behind all the cleaning. And so I actually hung it on a wall so nobody could stack anything in front of it, because obviously if you need a fire extinguisher, you probably need it right now.
So that's one you can find at pretty much any big box store or hardware store. And if I'm remembering right, they range from $40 to $60 for a basic one. You want to mount it in your kitchen where you know where it is. They're red so it shows up. Maybe it might not match your decor. But yeah, and they even have a little gauge on it that says, does it have enough pressure to where it will work? So you want to check those once in a while. I know I've got kids sometimes, if we're going to switch them out, or we'll even get one and let them each practice. You pull the ring out, aim and spray, let them maybe shoot a little burst outside in the back porch and make sure the pressure's still there. Something about practicing in muscle memory with kids and adults, frankly, of how to react in an emergency, because you can't really plan for those things, they just happen.
Absolutely. It's super simple to use a fire extinguisher when there's nothing scary happening, but you have the stress and then you add even a simple task that you've never done before. It can create a lot more stress or fear or doubt or whatever, but yeah, all it is pull the pin, aim, squeeze, and sweep. I don't know if it actually happens, but there's always a joke, guys that say, I've seen people pull the pin and throw the extinguisher in.
Like
it's not a grenade.
I read a study too that said if faced with a sudden emergency or an unexpected disaster or an event, that most people actually freeze. So you hear fight or flight. There's fight, flight, and freeze, and that's what I actually learned working for the health department with emergency response, is that most people, unfortunately, sort of go into paralysis, where they're trying to figure out what to do, time slows down. With the remaining 30%, half of those will panic and do something unwise, take the wrong action, and the last 15% take the next right action. And that's a percentage, I think, at the health department we try to expand and help more people practice or think about what they would do so they can become part of the group that does the next right thing. In your home, with your family, what can you do to prepare for, especially a house fire?
As silly as it may sound, do drills especially if you got little kids. If the smoke alarm's going off, we tell our kids to come get us because we're just straight across the hall, and then designate a meeting place, one close to the house and one maybe on the other side of your neighborhood or something, and practice it. We're having a fire drill, we're going to go over to my sister's house down the street or whatever, but go through that motion with the kids. And it's not as scary for them. If your house is on fire, you want to get out and stay out. There's no belongings in there that are worth risking you or your family members' lives for. You just get out, call 911, and the fire department will come trying to minimize the damage as much as they can.
You do hear about occasions when people try to go back in. Once the people are out, and sometimes pets are a factor there too, they'll think, I've got time to go in and maybe get something else. Like you say, once you're out, stay out. Let the firefighters come and put it out. It's just not worth added injury.
Correct, yeah. There's in a house fire, especially with all the plastics and It's the furniture isn't the same now as it was 30, 40 years ago. It's not like hardwood. It's all cheap. Forget the word, but like glued together, lots of glues and stuff like that. So the air in a structure fire can be extremely toxic almost right away as soon as there's smoke showing. That's stuff you do not want in your lungs.
Now, is there truth? I seem to remember hearing that if you're in a house and you detect smoke, that you should stay low to the ground. Is that the safest place to be as you're trying to evacuate?
It'll be cooler and the smoke will rise because it's warmer than the air, right? So getting low to the ground on your way out will help prevent inhaling some of those toxic chemicals and stuff. Absolutely. And it'll be easier to see. If you're standing upright and the smoke is at chest level, you're more likely to become disoriented or whatever. So get low and find your way out.
Yeah. So before we move on to responding to a house fire, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything as far as prevention. Are there any other things you can think of that you can do to prevent a house fire from occurring in the first place, other than making sure outside fires are out and things, available if a kitchen fire happens? What are things you can do to make sure a fire doesn't start in the first place?
You don't want to leave a bunch of like appliances plugged in that you don't need to, like your air fryer, stuff like that. Doesn't need to always be plugged in. Your blender, so unplug those small appliances and just plug them in when you're going to use them.
I hadn't thought of that. There's some things you might only use a couple times a week, so that's good advice. Unplug things you're not using on a daily basis.
Yep, and then the obvious ones like space heaters in the winter. Make sure that there's a few feet between your space heater and a wall or a piece of furniture or something like that, because they can cause fires. Candles. I've definitely gotten after my wife for some of her candle placements over the years. You don't want to put them under like drapes or near anything flammable, and certainly don't leave them lit while you're going to bed or leaving the house. It'll be just like a campfire. You don't walk away from a campfire. You shouldn't walk away from an open flame. And then you don't want to overload an outlet. So you don't want to take an extension cord and then plug a surge protector into 3 surge protectors and plug in a dozen different things into that one outlet, so you could potentially overload it and cause a fire there. Hopefully it'll just trip the breaker, but I wouldn't want to bet my house on it every time.
Now, what about smoke detectors?
Definitely to have them, especially in sleeping areas, is the most important, because that's, you're asleep, so you need something to wake you up. And they do actually make, for those with access and functional needs, they make detectors you can put on your bedside table or even in your bed, and then it'll vibrate really hard, so for people that are deaf. So have good detectors. Most of the ones now are all kind of linked on the same system, so you won't have an isolated. It shouldn't just be one detector going off. If one gets tripped, every detector in the house for newer houses, they'll all go off, which is a good thing. And they do run on your home power, but they all have batteries in them as a backup. So if you have a power outage or something like that, it'll go to the battery. So I think the recommendation is to check those batteries every month or two. They will chirp when the battery's getting low. That's what that chirp is. So if you can't get to your detector and you don't have anybody that can come swap that battery out for you, the fire department, we've done that, where we'll come and we'll get a ladder or whatever if you're unable to and get up there. I can't speak for all departments, but
but yours does. That's kind of a courtesy you do, especially maybe for seniors or people living alone that are worried or they can't get up there to change or check their batteries. Okay. You did mention evacuation plans. You mentioned meeting somewhere close by and then far away.
You want a close one. Make sure you've got everybody, get accountability, and then if a fire is developing, there's about to be fire engines and hose and responders all over the place. So have a designated spot where you can go and be out of the way and be safe, really, especially if you got little kids.
So if you've responded to probably quite a number of house fires, is there anything you found in common that made you think about your own safety, your own house, or any situations that taught you something or something you'd want to tell other people because of what you've seen or experienced?
Part of why I went hunting for my fire extinguisher is, how accessible is this thing? Because all these house fires start really small. So if you can get it when it's called the incipient phase, if you can get it with an extinguisher there, man, it just saves you so much heartache and money. If you can still call the fire department if there is something on fire in your house, but they're not going to need to use the volume of water and tear into walls and stuff to look for extension and stuff like that. So I think that's something I recently did, was I need to make sure this thing is accessible and everybody knows where it is. It can't be back behind all the cleaning stuff and laying down sideways.
So it's the simple things. Current fire extinguisher out and visible, smoke detectors in sleeping areas at least, so that means you probably need several in a home. And again, talking to your family, maybe even have a little bit of fun with it, training and practicing what you would do if there was some kind of a fire. Expanding away from home fires, you've worked in wildland fire as well. When it comes to wildfires, it's one of our most likely common disasters. We have a wildfire season here down in the southern part of the state. It can be dry, windy, not a lot of humidity. Thunderstorms come through, but if they don't drop a lot of precipitation but have lightning, I think I've heard that's a pretty common cause of fires, although I did hear that most sources of wildfires in Utah are human caused. What do people do to start those?
All kinds of things. A lot of it would be campfires improperly extinguished or whatever, but grinder, using equipment that creates a spark, fireworks, or older ATVs and stuff like that don't have the appropriate spark arrestor on them can start them. Just parking on dry grass, sometimes the muffler's hot enough. And
even a vehicle, you pull over, say you're on a dirt road, you pull over where there's dry grass,
Yep.
it can ignite from the underside of your car.
Dragging chains, we go on lots of fires along I-15 where, somebody's chain wasn't quite tight enough and it's dragging on the highway at 80 miles an hour while they're pulling a trailer and kicks sparks. And
is that where you see the roadside fires that tend to be kind of small because they can get them under control?
Yeah, that or they blew a tire or something.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of causes for them.
You mentioned fireworks. This is the month of July. We've passed the 4th, but in Utah we have the 24th of July where it's legal to light fireworks in most places in designated spots in town where there's least probability of causing a fire. But I think the fire departments are always extra busy on those nights, the 4th and the 24th. Even though they ask people to be careful, there's always someone that wants to light it somewhere else, or they have the type of fireworks that can get out of control. What would you say about that as far as fireworks safety and as far as them being a cause of fires?
I would say use the designated spots. They designated them for a reason. Like you said, they're in areas where it's not very likely to cause a fire. And then a lot of the fires we go on the 4th and the 24th are dumpster fires or trash fires because, it went off and then you went and threw it away and then it's still hot in there. So, it's definitely recommended to drop them in a bucket of water or hose them down good before you throw them in the trash can.
That's a great step because a lot of times we want people to pick up their mess because it can litter everything, but to make sure those things are actually out. So a bucket of water is a great piece of advice, that you douse the spent fireworks to make sure there's no sparks in them.
Yeah, I bet on the 4th we had 6 or 7 dumpster fires. Just from that. It's not that anybody necessarily did anything wrong. It's just fireworks done, we threw it away, and there's enough heat in it, and everything is wrapped in cardboard. So once a flame does happen, there's plenty of fuel in there for it to just go. But it's not as big of a deal if it's a dumpster in a designated area because they were placed away from everything.
Yeah.
But if you throw them in your personal garbage can up against your house, that could be a whole nother ball game.
We have a website I just want to make people aware of. It's swuhealth.gov, which is our website, /wildfires. And that gives just a few different links there where you can go to the state monitoring system to see what fires are currently burning. You can check air quality, and you can also learn about prevention and things along those lines. So we wanted to make sure we mention that to people. We appreciate all you do for the health department, also that you're still a firefighter for is it Cedar City Fire Department? So we appreciate that. And again, we're talking with Austin with our Emergency Preparedness Division, and we'll talk to everybody next time.
This podcast was brought to you by the Southwest Utah Public Health Department. For more information, visit swuhealth.gov.